Hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. My name is Aldrich Stambuk. I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. And today we're tackling a big issue for all of us, from our personal computers and phones to corporate and government. This is an issue that is of immense interest, not only for us here in Charlotte and in the region, but also nationally and internationally. So we have a panel that is going to show up with our speakers. Jesse, can we have that show?
So my PowerPoint just crashed. You might just want to go ahead with that one.
Well, we will introduce to you two speakers from Dixon Hughes, a company that is a member of the World Affairs Council. We are very grateful for their participation today. And we have Rodney Murray, who's the Principal Technology Advisory at DHG, and Tom Tollerton, who's the Managing Director, Technology Advisory at DHG. If you want to learn more about DHG, Dixon Hughes, as I said, you can see it in our chat box. We'll have it on our website, and we will include that information when we send you the video recording of today's program. Today we'll be talking, as you see, about risky business, protecting your company and yourself against global cyber attacks. I am looking forward so much to this program, as we all have problems with cybersecurity. The World Affairs Council Charlotte is the community's premier global education nonprofit and nonpartisan organization. We have always sought to bring the world closer to you and to build a community of internationally engaged citizens. Dialogue, knowledge, active participation, and an understanding of global issues are vitally important for our democracy, and let me add, our economy to flourish at all levels. Couple of housekeeping points. Your microphone will be on mute and your camera will be turned off for the duration of the presentation. We would like you to submit questions. I'm sure you have questions. To submit a question, please use the Q&A box in the Zoom toolbar. You can see it circled in red. Please do not use the chat box, because then we have to take it from the chat box and put it in the Q&A box. It is much more effective and efficient if you directly put your question into the Q&A box. Again, you can see it here on the Zoom toolbar in the middle. It is circled in red. This presentation, as I indicated, will be recorded, and we will send it out to all of you, today's participants and audience. Please make sure that you sign up with your correct email that you want to receive the video recording at. A couple of upcoming programs that might be of interest to you. On May 13th, 2021, we have the World Affairs Council Distinguished Speaker Series with Jake Wood, who is the co-founder and CEO of Team Rubicon and author of the Take Command, Lessons in Leadership, How to be a First Responder in Business. On May 26, 2021, for all of you who are young and feel young, please join the Young Professional Group of the World Affairs Council Charlotte. It is a meetup, it's a virtual barbecue mixer, and you will have a great time. And we will be joined by the young professionals of the World Affairs Council of San Antonio. So a great opportunity to make good friends in Texas. On June 3rd, 2021, as you know, we have a new football club here in Charlotte. It's called the Charlotte Football Club. We're excited about it. There's a lot of excitement in the community. And on June 3rd, we will be speaking with Zoran Kerneta, who is the sporting director, and Nick Kelly, who is the team president of the Charlotte Football Club. So join us May 13th, May 26th, and June 3rd. You'll have a blast. As you know, these are difficult times for all of us, for everyone, businesses, families, but also for nonprofits. The World Affairs Council Charlotte is an event-based organization. We have not had an event since last March. It is hard to sustain our mission, but we're managing thanks to you, our supporters. So if you are able to donate to support the World Affairs Council, and these are tax-deductible donations, please do so. If you're not a member, please do become a World Affairs Council member. It means a lot to us, and you will be sustaining a global education nonprofit that plays a vital role in our community. Thank you. If you're on social media, do not miss in connecting with the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. We're on all the major social media channels, so do join us, like us, share, and follow the World Affairs Charlotte.org organization. Quick bio of Rodney Murray, who's based here in Charlotte and leads the firm's technology advisory practice. Rodney has more than 25 years of experience in information technology and business applications, including providing internal audit and risk management services. Very important in these days. Rodney's client bases includes financial institutions, hospitals and healthcare providers, state and local governments, manufacturers, hosting and application service providers, and third-party services providing financial transaction processing. Prior to joining DHG, Rodney worked for a Big Four accounting firm for more than 6 years, delivering IT risk and advisory services across all industry segments. Prior to public accounting, Rodney worked for Bank of America in the areas of computer operations, telecommunications, system conversion, and internal audit of corporate information systems. Rodney, great to have you here today with us. And let's look at Tom. Tom Tollerton has more than 15 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry and manages the firm's cybersecurity and data privacy compliance services. Tom focuses in cyber risk management, data privacy compliance, SOC reporting, and PCI compliance assessments. His experience includes performance of cybersecurity risk assessments and data privacy assessment and consulting projects in various compliance audits. His clients include organizations of all sizes in the fintech, dealership, communications, insurance, and software industries, including Fortune 500 corporations. Tom has been published in national publications and is a regular speaker on cybersecurity and privacy topics at various industry events. So we're very, very fortunate to have with us Rodney and Tom from DHG here today. And I will turn it over. Rodney, you will start. Thank you again for being here. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our board members and the World Affairs Council of Charlotte team for putting this great program. And I'm sure it's going to be great today for us. Rodney, it's all yours.
LJ, thank you. Tom and I are just delighted to be here today. We do a lot of speaking on this topic and have for a number of years. And what you're going to find today, I think, is there are probably some common themes that we have heard about in various presentations over the years, but we're also going to try to bring to you, what we're seeing lately as we're working with clients. Some clients who are doing a really good job from a cybersecurity posture perspective, and others that are challenged from a resource perspective, from a financial perspective, or just because of the types of data that they operate with that goes across a variety of different compliance and federal government requirements. So we're going to try to bring some of that to you. We're going to leave time for questions. And so if you can hold off on questions till we get through, we'll be glad to answer them and stay on as long as is needed on that front. So our agenda today, we're going to cover the cyber threat environment, just give a bit of an update on what we're seeing out there. There's several sources that we go to, and they're out there on the public internet. Verizon, IBM, various companies have different reporting that they do to kind of gather information on breaches, security incidents, costs, spend. And we're going to bring a few of those statistics to you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the call of action. What can we do individually when we're at home or as a user on a corporate network or when we're working at work. And then 2021 and beyond, and just really kind of touch on what we think is coming down the pipe. And again, what we're seeing out in our client base and some of the struggles that they're dealing with. So we wanted to touch initially on the kind of the current environment out there. And you know, I can tell you, as Tom and I have been doing these presentations over the last several years, you look at the average cost of a data breach being $3.86 million. That's in the US. And that number continues to go up. I would say probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe it was $500,000, maybe it was closer to $1 million, but this number continues to go up for a variety of reasons. And when you look at the cost of a breach to a company, when we go in and work with companies that have had security incidents that potentially lead to breaches, here really is kind of a potential life cycle of risk and financial impact to a company. You've got regulatory industry. If you're a banking, healthcare, you've got potential fines and penalties. There's cost associated with remediation. Most scenarios that we get involved with that's been a data breach, you know, you've got forensics teams that come in. You've got a lot of work that's done to identify the breach, what was the origin of the breach. But in most cases, you've got to invest in brand new infrastructure and almost start from scratch with servers and network components in some cases. And there's a big cost associated with that. We do see on the news, you know, there's civil litigation, the risk of fraudulent transactions. A big one that's really hard for us to really quantify is brand damage. Nobody wants to have their name in the paper. And what is a challenge on the brand damage is a lot of times, you know, our companies are highlighted in the news cycle, but the breach or the incident actually is with a third party that's sitting somewhere in the background that most of our customers, clients don't really connect to us because they just don't know how that works. And then there's the forensic investigation aspect of that too. The average time to discover a breach right now, the average time is 200 days. And I'll tell you, in most cases we've gotten involved with, we could not go back far enough to figure out how that breach actually occurred because our clients don't retain enough data. They don't go back 2 years, 3 years to figure out exactly how long ago that incident happened. So that is a challenge, again, to feel comfortable that you know exactly how something happened. But we all know how what the impact is if you look at the life cycle here. Next slide, please.
When you think about that 200 days, that's a lot of time to be in there. And what we're seeing attackers do, not just get in, grab whatever information they think is valuable and get out. The objective for them is really to get in and stay and figure out other backdoors and establish backdoors that they can, if you close the initial point of attack for them, they have other ways to get in. And then from there, they're trying to hop to other networks and partners. And so forth. So that's a lot of time to be doing a lot of mischievous behavior. But so Rodney, you talked about the cost, you talked about the impact. How is this happening? We hear about hacking all the time, but in reality, what is behind the hackers? How are they doing this? And one of the most rapidly growing avenues that attackers are taking is around the supply chain. Large companies, Fortune 500 companies, are investing millions of dollars annually in security controls, preventive measures, detective measures. They're getting ready for this sort of stuff. But smaller, medium-sized companies who may be in the supply chain or the vendor chain of those large companies, don't have the resources, and attackers are starting to prey upon that. Apple was just in the news the other day. Apple being very secretive with their intellectual property and with their upcoming products. One of their manufacturing providers was actually breached, and schematics of future products were compromised. And the attacker who stole that information then exploited Apple, trying to get them to pay a huge ransom to prevent the release of that information. Similarly, we had a huge supply chain breach with SolarWinds, which is a network monitoring tool that IT companies across tens of thousands of companies use every day to monitor the operations of their IT systems. SolarWinds itself was compromised, and a malicious software package was pushed out to all the 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 companies that use that product. And we still don't know the impacts of that breach. Upwards of 18,000 companies were compromised by that malicious software that was authorized, presumably, to be in those companies' networks. And we won't see the full impacts of that SolarWinds breach perpetrated from Russia, frankly, for years to come. Similarly, business email compromise. Attackers now are not necessarily trying to just get in and steal information. They're compromising entire email systems just to watch email and to see what happens in businesses, how monetary transfers, financial transfers occur, who's authorized to do it, and so forth. There was a recent breach from a Chinese espionage group called Hafnium that compromised the Microsoft email platform called Exchange. And any company that had a Microsoft Exchange server in their environment was vulnerable to this espionage group. And again, we are still just sort of feeling the fallout of that and trying to determine who was impacted. But email being very sensitive information. Infected websites, we hear a lot about phishing emails and clicking malicious attachments and PDF files and Word files, but websites themselves are a very hot area of exploit. There are exploits in the wild right now whereby attackers are compromising websites, and simply visiting that website as a general user can open up our browsers and our computers to infection, malware infection. So we don't have to click on anything other than just literally going to an infected web domain and have our systems compromised. And then finally, Internet of Things. And in business, we call it operational technology. So things like HVAC systems and elevator control systems, fire protection, fire alerting systems, water, power. These systems are increasingly connected to the internet for administrative convenience, but they also have little computers in them. And when you combine computers with internet connectivity, you open up those systems to connectivity from across the world. And unfortunately, these systems are very often overlooked from a security perspective. And we, as our team, has actually been able to compromise a hospital system through their power supply system, their APC system in their data center, with a simple generic password. The password was actually password, and we were able to compromise their power system and could have brought down the hospital's entire power system.
Tom, let me add just a couple of things here. One is we are still working with some of our clients who we have to convince they still are a target. And right now, if your company has any type of internet presence, transactions, email, I mean, almost everyone now has that scenario, and everyone is a potential target as the hackers are using automated tools and techniques to kind of probe and figure out what's going on. We've seen an uptick the last 2 years. I've worked pretty closely with our cyber technical team with vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, ethical hacking, and we've seen a big push on actual web applications and websites that I think a lot of us probably automatically think they're secure, but some of these were developed several years ago, and like everything else, we're going to use technology and systems and apps really as long as we can to get that ROI up on it. So we've seen a switch to that. So a lot of focus right now on apps themselves. Next slide, please. Top vulnerabilities that we are seeing out there, and I would say these probably cross both the corporate world and the individual user at home world. This group has not really changed over the last 4 or 5 years. Poor user awareness. I mean, we're still seeing that with the ransomware attacks. We get a couple of calls a week from clients where, an employee clicked on an email, even though there are protections in place against, spam and viruses and things like that. We almost can't spend enough to have 100% accuracy rate on preventing these things from happening. And so a lot of ransomware is getting in from that. But, we can default passwords. I can tell you when I worked at the bank many, many years ago, we were trying to figure the password thing out for our employees. Missing security patches. We still see situations where our clients don't really want to patch older systems because they think they may break them. And so we've seen a couple of interesting scenarios with that. Poorly configured devices from a security perspective, routers, firewalls, printers, video cameras. There are all kinds of ways that that the bad folks can figure out how to get in. And then poor visibility, meaning not enough spend on monitoring and alerting when certain things are going on. And a lot of times, again, I mentioned earlier, it's a cost issue, it's a resource issue, but very important these days to know if there's some activity that's happening against your systems. Next slide, please.
And so no cyber presentation today can really go without talking about ransomware. You know, I would presume that most on this call have, in some capacity, come across ransomware, whether it's you know, within at home or within their business, or they know some business that has been impacted by ransomware. And it frankly is the #1 threat right now from a cyber perspective. And you can see there on the screen, the cost of dealing with ransomware has almost doubled. It almost doubled from 2019 to 2020. And the reality is, it's a very simple business model. So most of it is perpetrated from China and from Russia, you know, cyber adversaries of the United States. But frankly, the malware itself that causes ransomware or causes the your data to be encrypted is easily accessible to anyone. So I could go online and just download the software that does this and then send it out to email addresses that I have and just see if people click on the attachments that have that software embedded in it. It's a very simple business model in that attackers can just send out those emails and wait to see who gets infected and who needs to pay the ransom. There are very sophisticated and constantly evolving variants of ransomware that are now able to not just infect one machine, but can infect entire networks. And there have been headlines about counties, municipalities, and state agencies that have been infected by ransomware, and you know, the payment of the ransom to get access to their systems back has cost millions of dollars in some cases. So again, very popular form of attack and very difficult to deal with, and just is it impacts companies across the gamut, small to large, any industry. Access to your systems is absolutely vital to business operation.
Tom, let me add there too. We've seen a change over the years where initially clients in no way would consider paying the ransom. And now we're seeing more and more situations because of you know, how this spreads, and when they lock some of these businesses down, ransoms are being paid, encryption keys are being provided. And it's interesting that, you know, the business side of the ransomware is that there's a help desk, and actually they'll help you figure out how to pay with cryptocurrency. So it's evolved, as Tom mentioned, it's evolved into a business, but we do see a lot of situations now where the ransom actually gets paid because it shortens the amount of time that the business is down.
You know, and I'll actually add to that too, Rodney, that in some cases, you know, talking about the attackers becoming more sophisticated and trying to stay in front of, you know, our response to these type of attacks. You know, in cases where companies don't need to pay the ransom, they have backups of their data that are viable, and they wouldn't need to restore those backups. Attackers are now threatening to release sensitive information to the public if the ransom isn't paid, if the fee isn't paid one way or the other, frankly. So it almost doesn't matter anymore if data is held ransom or encrypted. The attackers are going to figure out a way to get their dollars. Next slide.
So we did want to touch on personal behaviors, and these do cross, you know, whether I'm on my laptop at home or if I'm in the office or working on a company device. And you know, what we've seen over the last number of years is that, you know, there's blurred line now between a personal device and when is it a work device. So, you know, these really haven't changed. You know, avoid reusing passwords. A lot of the scenarios that we do research on, you know, whether it was a LinkedIn breach or Yahoo or some other potential, you know, breach that happened years ago that maybe we had an email account with and we were using a password, just very important to rotate those. And most, you know, most companies are doing a really good job of that now. But password length is also important because the longer the password, the harder it is for it to be decoded. Password managers are out there, and I know we were kind of we were sensitive to those for a while, but those now are a better, frankly, a better option than we see either creating a list or putting on sticky notes. I mean, you would be surprised what we still see during some walkthroughs. Again, being vigilant for malicious emails and attachments. Again, it's that user awareness, that, hey, this doesn't quite seem right. We've got training programs that we put in place at our company, and most do now, just to keep our users and our employees tuned up as to what's going on. Very important to keep all software up to date. Microsoft continually puts out new releases that have security implications to them. And a lot of times what we don't think about is that every other application that we use on a day in, day out basis also needs to be kept up to date because they are potential vulnerability points in our system. And then keeping offline backups of data. And so when something does go wrong, such as a ransomware attack at a company, or we're having issues with our own device, you know, having backups, we've been preaching that for years and years, but having those backups are going to just, you know, get you back up to speed a lot quicker. Next slide, please.
And you know, back to those personal behaviors, you know, those are important for us at home, but any, you know, corporate IT leader, cyber leader is going to tell you that people are the first line of defense, you know, when it comes to cybersecurity and data protection. So that basic blocking and tackling of, you know, keeping your passwords secure, not reusing the same password, using strong passwords, you know, keeping your personal devices up to date, good security awareness, those are all important, you know, from a data protection standpoint in the enterprise as well. And so in addition to the basic blocking and tackling, the personal behaviors, you know, corporate cybersecurity needs to be governed effectively. And so the wheel on the right here is a industry standard approach to cybersecurity governance. It's from a framework called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or NIST CSF. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So a sort of a technology agnostic standards body. And they call this wheel the 5 functions of cybersecurity. And, you know, we'll just kind of generally speaking, walk through these. Identify refers to the idea of identifying what data and information that you have, what your data is, where it sits, how it comes inside, or how it comes into and leaves your environment, who has access to it, just understanding, you know, the nature of your information and your control environment. Moving on to protection, you know, once you understand what you've got, then you can figure out how to protect it and implement strong cybersecurity controls, whether it's technical, like firewalls, or malware, or more sophisticated tools to protect from third-party attacks. That happens with protection function. But we have to assume that at some point, something is going to get behind or beside or around, I guess, our protection function. So we need to be able to detect that. We need to have logging and monitoring, as Rodney mentioned earlier. You know, being able to have visibility and see what's going on inside of our environment to help prevent, you know, a long-term data breach, reduce those 200 days, as we talked about earlier in the conversation. You know, and once we do detect something, we need to be able to respond to it. So that 4th function of being able to, you know, minimize the impact, triage the impacted systems, protect the data via an incident response plan. You know, legal action, being able to reduce the overall impact of an incident, and then finally recovery. You know, once we've fixed the issue, how quickly can we return to business as usual? The companies that prepare for a data breach as though it were going to happen are typically the ones that are able to recover the quickest. But unfortunately, doing all of this does require, financial investment. We do say, that old adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's absolutely true in this case. We find the companies that do invest up front typically have to pay less or have less cost on the back end. But technology infrastructure, having the right people, skill sets inside of your organization or outside via third parties, managed service providers, having additional support, is critically important. User awareness, as Rodney talked about, being able to educate your workforce on an ongoing basis, not just annually, not just occasionally, but continuing to educate people on emerging threats and then testing the effectiveness of that awareness training program is paramount. And then cyber liability insurance, which is a very important control. It's an emerging market that's sort of solidifying, help protect and minimize financial costs.
Tom, I wanted to touch on Identify real quick. We're seeing massive migration to the cloud, and knowing where your data is and where the boundaries are between your responsibilities for managing the risk and security of that data and the cloud service provider or the cloud provider, it is really important. We've made decisions in our own firm with some solutions that because we checked into a cloud solution and understanding where they manage that data globally, we weren't comfortable with the way they were doing that or what we were hearing on that front. So we made some business decisions on that, and I know it's tough. The cloud is very attractive from a cost perspective for obvious reasons. But again, knowing where your data is and who's responsible for monitoring the security of it, securing it, just very important. And it seems like that gets muddier every year as we can have multiple cloud solutions that now we're working with to present one common view of a transaction to a client or a customer. Next slide, please.
So, what is coming next? What do we have to look forward to now that we've kind of dropped all of this struggle? We continue to see data breaches increase. The impact remains large for most companies, financially so, and cost is going to continue to go up. Expected to be over $10 trillion by the year 2025. It increases every year, and yet we continue to see data breaches be a problem for companies. But as far as what to expect, we continue to see emerging legislation and regulation. Industries have frameworks and compliance obligations, the payment card industry for credit card data security, HIPAA for healthcare information. There's a new framework that's emerging for government contractors and defense contractors. We're continuing to see these frameworks pop up to try and mitigate these risks. And states as well, individual states in the US are starting to pass data privacy laws and breach notification laws that are extremely stringent and are designed to protect individual consumers, protect their privacy, protect their data security, and give them additional rights, including private right of action in many states, protect their information from data breaches and also unauthorized use by companies. And what that's really creating, frankly, is this patchwork of state legislation. So California, has two now very restrictive data privacy laws. Virginia just passed one. New York has a privacy law and considering another one. And what that's doing is placing additional strain on security departments, IT departments, legal departments, and companies to keep up with all the requirements. And so what, frankly, I anticipate in the next 3 to 5 years, potentially sooner, is federal legislation around data privacy and consumer rights, which will set a standard for all companies in all industries to protect information. We talked about it earlier, continuing to see more sophisticated and targeted attacks nation state attacks are becoming immense. I mentioned Hafnium as an espionage group in China. These groups are starting to use technology like artificial intelligence to more intelligently identify targets, to break passwords more quickly and more easily, and also to sort of gather and compile information, aggregate information about a particular target from various sources. So attackers are becoming much more sophisticated. We talked about attacks on supply chains as well, vulnerability points in large companies, supply chains with hundreds or thousands of providers. There's a vulnerability point out there, and attackers know it, and they're looking for it constantly. We are seeing a shift from security to data privacy, and the concepts are related. I mentioned California's privacy law, the California Consumer Privacy Act. Privacy looks at not just protecting information from unauthorized access, but also gives consumers rights about how their information is used by companies who are authorized to have that information. So social media networks like Facebook, are highly scrutinized right now with how they are using our information. But we will continue to see a focus on expectation that companies are being good stewards of our personal information. And then finally, cyber liability insurance. This industry is growing rapidly, Rodney, and I know you have some comments and thoughts on it, but it's starting to mature in terms of, what payouts, what premiums are, for one thing. They're becoming more standardized. And then insurance companies are starting to expect more of the insured to make sure they're doing due diligence to protect information and don't just rely completely on cyber liability insurance.
We actually had a client recently that had a security incident and did not go to their cyber liability insurance policy and firm because they were afraid it was going to raise premiums. So we do see a bit of everything out there. Most liability insurance, once you have an incident and trigger it, there's a soup to nuts approach. Firms lined up. I mean, it is there to give quick response, but again, that was a scenario that we had not seen before. Normally it's okay, we're going to get our insurance and we're going to get moving down this trail pretty quickly. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting perspective. And then I think the insurance companies are getting smarter about what they're seeing at certain clients of theirs that would potentially lower premium if they feel more comfortable that there are controls and processes in place. So that is maturing. We're still seeing that mature. Next slide. I think we're probably to questions. I know I've seen 3 or 4. Just quick overview here of some of the things we're doing in the space. But if we want to get to questions, I don't know if we want to just pick those off the chat or how we want to work with those.
Sure. So I think now is a great time to transition to questions. Thank you, first off, for that conversation. Cybersecurity and attacks really aren't something that I've been very familiar with, and I think you guys did a great job of really breaking it down and making it very digestible. So my name is Jessie Herman. I'm the Director of Programs and Community Outreach with the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. And if you have questions for our presenters today, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. So to get us started, you both mentioned Russia and China quite a few times. So I'm curious, how do those cyber attacks differ between the two countries? And what's the next region we should be watching?
No, that's a fair question. They don't differ too much. There are different groups in, we call them advanced persistent threats. But both of, their objectives in all nation states are really to disrupt. They're trying to disrupt, find vulnerability points in not just the public sector, not just the government. They're not just trying to compromise, the Department of Defense and so forth, but also our private sector as well. Because the defense supply chain, the federal supply chain is immense as well. As far as other adversaries, they are, as you might expect, Iran and North Korea, Iran being a, very hot adversary as well. But this is, I saw a quote, I think it was a year or two ago, but for the cost of one fighter jet, Russia could hire 6,000 hackers. And if you think about that, a fighter jet to attempt to bomb or to take out a physical target, a 6,000 cyber attackers could easily take out power systems, water systems, critical infrastructure here in the United States. So this is definitely the next battlefield, the cyber world.
All right, and we've got, quite a few questions from folks curious about how they can best protect themselves and their businesses. And a really interesting question we've got is, how big does your business need to be to have cyber security insurance?
Rodney, you want to take that, or do you?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on what the business does and the nature of the data that they have. How proprietary is it? Bottom line is, you've at least got client lists, customer lists. I mean, you've got proprietary data there on your employees. Everybody's got something to protect. So again, Tom mentioned that market is continuing to evolve. I would recommend everyone look into it and just get an idea of what the premiums are, what the coverage is. We would recommend everyone take a look at that.
Great. A fun question. How complicated does my password really need to be?
So one answer we will give is the ideal password length to prevent someone from getting the hash file, which is the file that can be decrypted potentially using computer automation. The ideal length is 15 characters. Okay, and so yeah, and so we've gone to passphrases in some cases. Normally, you're going to see between 8 to 10, which is fine. We do ask that system administrators, internal network administrators that have, they're managing databases and systems, that they do go to a stronger password, and it really does, as you increase sometimes we have a slide on this, Tom, but as you increase every digit in a password length, it becomes astronomically harder for somebody to actually crack it. I can tell you, we've got tools that run millions of passwords through databases and things in seconds. So it is possible, but we see 8 to 10, honestly, in most businesses, but we do ask administrators to bump that up some.
And also, you alluded to it, Rodney, that the password guidance has changed over the last several years. We used to say it needs to be this random combination of letters, numbers, and special characters. And the reality is people were writing those down and they were reusing them because they're hard to remember. So that is no longer best practice guidance. Frankly, it's more effective if you use a password of 3 or 4 just sort of common words, string them together with a number or a special character in between them. So I'm just looking around here, frame dash light dash doorknob dash 1 is a much stronger password, much easier to remember than some sort of string of characters that no one's ever going to remember.
Great, thanks for that. I've got some updating I guess I need to do. So this is an interesting question that I think you can kind of answer both from an individual perspective and a company perspective. But if I notice that something has gone amok with my information, I've been a victim of a cyber attack, what is my first move? Do I call the police, my board of directors, my insurer?
If it's personal information, it's typically the police. If it's internal, if it's a corporate issue, a security department or a legal department typically is the first, or external counsel is typically the first stop. Rodney, would you agree?
Well, yeah, and I would say, smaller businesses, they don't have quite the infrastructure and the IT department that larger have, obviously, but notifying them to let them know that potentially something's going on. We still hear stories of, I got a call from Microsoft. You're not going to get a call from Microsoft to troubleshoot something. And so we see lots of different schemes and things. We actually had a client that had two individuals in Philadelphia. This was 5 or 6 years ago. I believe it was Philly. Two individuals walk in pretending to be, federal government and trying to extort, information. So there's a lot of brashness out there. There's a lot of different ways. We see a lot of schemes built around hurricanes, relief efforts, things like that. It's just, it's frustrating, but there's no lack of imagination for building some kind of scheme and figuring something out like that. But knowing, and you're having your employees know who to go to initially, because the quicker you identify these things, the better off you're going to be to get to the bottom of it.
Great. Another topic we've got a few questions on that again can be answered and have been asked both from the individual and company perspective. A question from Quanta Don Light: if at all possible, what can individuals do to minimize risk to themselves in their own personal digital virtual life? And the same thing kind of for business from Taylor Collins. What should your steps be to make sure that your small business is prepared?
Well, I can touch on one piece of that. I mean, we're having a lot of conversation from a corporate perspective internally around email, using corporate email addresses for just personal apps and things like that. We actually went out and did some dark web research on some of our leaders and team members to figure out what is out there floating around on the dark web and different marketplaces, or what is floating out there and what have they been subject to. And we've all been subject to various different breaches in the past. Again, I mentioned Yahoo, I mentioned LinkedIn. I mean, it's just some common things that we all use. But so we're having a lot of conversation right now. We can't really force people to not use their company ID, their company email address, but we're having a lot of conversation about it. We're going to encourage people not to do that. Again, creating that separation between the company side of my daily interaction and the personal side. I never personally save passwords when I'm asked to do that, when I'm logging into things. I'm just very careful. I don't, I just try to think in everything that I do when I'm logging in. I don't have IDs automatically pop up from a personal perspective. Again, this may not be helpful, but for me, I'm just doing everything I can do to kind of keep that wall up that I'm protecting myself. Tom, any other thoughts on that?
No, that basic blocking and tackling we talked about from a personal standpoint is the passwords, the patching. I mean, that all goes a long way. Don't put information out there that you're not willing to lose control of. Is another way to minimize your risk. If it's not out there, then it's better protected. From a corporate standpoint, have trusted provider. I think the question was around small businesses, what they can do to be prepared. Have a trusted advisor, in your if it's your IT provider, if it's a third-party security specialist, help them define what your risk tolerance is, help you determine from a compliance standpoint, from a general practice standpoint, what is best practice, what do we need to be doing, and how do we get there? And then continue to work and plan to meet that expectation.
Jesse, let me add too, we see a lot of clients, and these are small, middle market companies that are using IT providers to help provide support in some form or fashion. It could be 24/7. It could be help to implement new systems. And a lot of times it's assumed that they're also protecting them from a cybersecurity perspective. And sometimes that's not in the contract and it's not being done. So knowing what you're getting with those third parties that you're working with from an IT perspective and what you're not getting, for some of our clients can be a little eye-opening.
Interesting. And a great question from David Johnston. What are the legal implications of paying a ransom?
Rodney, did you want to?
No, I saw that question and I was really working on it. We typically, when we're involved in that scenario, legal is involved. So I don't know that we've touched on that aspect of it. I mean, Tom, can you think in the situations what that discussion was like?
You know, I mean, a recent client of ours, you know, didn't want to engage legal counsel, and frankly, there's risk to the forensic company that may help you, or the security company, because that information, you know, around a security incident is protected by attorney-client privilege, and that's an important consideration. The other thing I would say is when it comes to legal impact, you know, breach is a very sensitive word legally. So there's a line between a security incident and a data breach. And traditionally, a ransomware attack has not been considered a data breach. It's been considered a security incident and needs to be handled, and can be handled internally. Now, when it comes to ransomware, as I talked about, you know, that model is changing. The attackers are not just encrypting the data, but they're also stealing it and releasing it. So now we're frankly starting to advise clients that if you have a ransomware attack, you do need to engage legal counsel, because there is a breach implication to it. And it's really important too, in these situations, to retain that attorney-client privilege in the event, you know, litigation occurs.
Great. So this is, you know, maybe a question about how DHG measures this explicitly, or just maybe the field, but how do you determine whether your cybersecurity strategy is successful, is effective?
I'll take it, Rodney.
That's a great question that everybody's struggling with. I'm going to be interested in your comments, Tom, and then I'll see what I've got.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing happens, I guess it's good. You know, if people think that we're spending enough money, we're putting enough effort into it, and then the next year something does happen. So it's certainly understandable. Frankly, what we're starting to look at are some benchmarks and some measurables, kind of trying to put metrics around, you know, what our technology, what our investments, what our processes are doing. You know, how many phishing attacks are we blocking, you know, every month or every year? You know, how many malware openings have our anti-malware softwares stopped? Just trying to kind of capture, all right, are we seeing value in our investment? Rodney, did you have any other thoughts?
I mean, I was just going to say, even our more mature clients, you know, you can't outspend the risk. You can't do it. So you got to really be comfortable with identifying what's left over once you apply your resources, use third parties. That in itself is the biggest challenge I can tell you our clients have. How do they feel comfortable? And then when they move that into the boardroom, how can they have, you know, the board, upper management, how can everyone be comfortable on what can be a fairly technical topic, but that the resources are being applied? You know, it's a defense in depth strategy. It's layers. It's you know, putting security at every layer in some form or fashion of your network, to your systems, to your data, to your users. There's no really easy, I guess, answer to that question. That is a really good question. It's the one everyone, I would say, struggles the most with.
So a question from an attendee that I can tie personally. All of my information was stolen in 2015. At this point, is it worth going back and redoing it, or is it out there forever now? Do I need to, how do I change once I've been compromised?
Kind of depends upon what was stolen. I mean, if we're talking about, you know, social security numbers and things like that. Frankly, I was part of a breach as well, of the federal government, and one of their suppliers that does background checks. I mean, my fingerprints, you know, were taken for my secret.
Also, 2015 OPM hack, join the club. Exactly,
the OPM breach. So it's out there forever. There's no way I can change my fingerprints. You know, it's out there. Really, what you can do now is monitor. You know, I've got security monitoring and identity monitoring from that OPM breach. Also have a secondary provider for that. So I'm tracking credit monitoring. I'm tracking where my identity pops up. That at this point is the best we can do.
Got it. And kind of, speaking of federally, you talked a little bit about federal legislation that's coming down the line. So kind of two thoughts here. We have a question asking what's hindering that federal data protection regulation? And I guess, where do you see that going?
So I saw that question and I was glad it was coming up, because my first response was going to be, have you seen Washington in action? But we do think something is coming. What is interesting and frankly confusing is the states have not waited on DC to get their act together. So New York jumped in early. I think Texas, we're seeing various states now implement different requirements, frankly, from a security and privacy perspective. And, for our clients that are, across state lines, and then we've got some that are, have requirements globally. European Union, they've got different requirements from a privacy perspective. So it's tough on clients who are transacting business across multiple states. You have an incident, a breach, then, it really is a legal conundrum to figure out what are the impacts, what do I need to report on? And it's just a huge challenge. We do think something's going to come out of DC. And will it supersede what's going on with the states? That again, I don't know about that. Tom, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. Partisanship is a big part of it. The other part of it, frankly, is scalability of the requirements. So, what is right for a Fortune 500 company when it comes to security control, protection, penalty is not the same for a small mom and pop shop that has some sensitive information as part of what they do. So it's just, there's been a lot of back and forth and struggle with that. But since the states are starting to get a grip around it, I would anticipate that the federal government will get around it as well.
Tom is working very closely on new CMMC compliance requirement for federal government contractors. And, they really built this from scratch over the last year, 18 months, and they're struggling building something that will apply to both a small government contractor and a large, because we just know that one size does not fit all when it comes to requirements like that. So we'll see more of that coming out of the federal government, I'm sure.
Interesting. I'm sure we'll all be watching to see where that ends up. So we have time for about one question left. And I know we've touched on pieces of this, but if there is one takeaway that each of you would give our audience members today to best protect themselves in this digital world, what would you recommend?
I hate to be this guy, but be skeptical. You've got to be skeptical. It's unfortunate, but we can't just look at our emails. Oh, even somebody that we know sent us an email. If someone we know sent us an email that looks funny, has a link that we're not expecting, we have to be dubious of that, even though it came from somebody we know. So unfortunately, when it comes to IT, my tip is to just be skeptical.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to user awareness. There are a lot of good economical training programs. We've got one that's kind of turned a training series into cartoons, but it does put some real life examples out in front of our employees, and we do it annually. We have 7 or 8 modules that we have to go through annually. We track that. One of the best protections that we've got is an employee, frankly, looking at something going, that doesn't quite seem right. And to have them on their radar, what are the characteristics of some of these techniques and things that are being used, especially in email, I think is just helpful for all of us.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wayne Cooper, our chairman of the board, to close us out for the day.
I got my microphone, but it don't have the video, but that's okay. Anyway, whatever. But gee, Tom and Rodney, what a great presentation. As I was watching that, I was thinking of companies that I wish could see it, which incidentally will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. And I know I, for one, want to watch it again. The things that I missed. I think Jesse said it much better, but you took a very difficult subject and made it largely understandable, even for us peons there. As our fearless leader, LJ Stanbuck, said at the beginning, if you're not a member, please become one. And with that, we'll, I want to also mention, maybe LJ mention the upcoming programs that we got coming. Really got some good one. And with that, I'll turn it back over to LJ and see everybody at the next event.
LJ, you are muted. LJ, you are still muted. You should have a.
I don't know what happened. I unmuted twice and it didn't. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Tom. We will make sure that we do share with a lot of our corporate partners and with the general audience. My dog was so impressed that he's singing in the background and I can't get up to stop him. I apologize for that. But I do want to say on upcoming programs, we have a big surprise. We will have General David Petraeus speaking to us on Afghanistan and the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and what does it all mean. And I believe it's June 17th. Am I correct, Jesse? It is June 17th. So if for nothing else, please do join us on June 17th to hear General Petraeus on Afghanistan and the withdrawal of the U.S. from Afghanistan. Again, this was one of the most important topics we had this year and in quite some time. I want to thank our friends, Rodney and Tom from, excuse me, I want to thank you all. Close it up. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.